Undercover boss buys a truck at his own dealership, stops cold when he hears a customer behind him. This is outrageous. You said the price was $35,000, but this bill has $5,000 in processing and extended warranty fees I never asked for. This is a scam, bellowed Mr. Henderson, his face reddening as he slammed the contract onto the manager's desk. The manager, cool as ice, retorted, "Sir, all fees are standard procedure, and you signed the agreement. Perhaps you should have read the fine print more carefully." What happened next? To hear how an undercover boss uncovered the truth behind this confrontation and brought justice to his dealership, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and listen to the full story. The low hum of the air conditioning did little to cool the sudden prickle of heat on Mike Thompson's neck. He stood in the gleaming showroom of Carter's Trucks in Minneapolis, a brochure for a 3/4-ton diesel clutched in his hand, its glossy finish crinkling under the pressure of his tightening grip. He'd been feigning interest, a carefully constructed persona of a first-time truck buyer, a man named Mike who supposedly ran a small contracting business and needed something reliable. The young salesperson, Sarah, had been polite, if a little green, and had just stepped away to fetch a sample financing agreement. It was then that the voices sliced through the muzak. Absolutely not paying that. What in God's name is a dealer prep reconciliation fee? The voice was older, laced with indignation and a tremor of disbelief. A smoother, unctuous tone replied, dripping with false patience. "Sir, as I explained, these are standard. Every vehicle undergoes a rigorous preparation process. The reconciliation ensures all services are accounted for." Mike, or rather Jason Carter, the actual owner of Carter's Trucks, didn't move. He kept his back to the escalating confrontation, his eyes fixed unseeingly on a poster detailing towing capacities. His John Deere cap, pulled low, and the non-prescription glasses were meant to make him blend in, but now he felt exposed, every nerve ending a light. Standard? I bought 5 trucks in my life, and I've never seen a fee list this long or this creative. The older man's voice cracked. "This is thousands more than we discussed. You said 35,000. Out the door." "Well, sir, out the door is a colloquial term. The base vehicle price was indeed in that range. These are the necessary additions for titling, warranty activation, and our premium protection package, which you'll be grateful for." There was a condescending edge to the slick voice now. A fist slammed onto a desk. The sound reverberated through the showroom, sharp and sudden. Other customers glanced over, conversations faltering. "This is bait and switch. You get me in here with one price, then bury me in paperwork and hidden charges hoping I won't notice? I want my deposit back. I'm walking." A cold chuckle. "Mr. Larson, you signed the initial agreement. It clearly states all sales are final after the cooling-off period, which, if you recall, you waived to expedite delivery. The truck is yours. Or rather, it will be once the financing clears and these ancillary costs are settled." "You're a damn crook. I'd watch your tone, Mr. Larson. We're trying to be civil here." Jason's jaw was so tight it ached. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears. This wasn't just aggressive salesmanship. This was something else, something ugly and predatory, happening right under his nose in his dealership. The brochure in his hand was now a mangled wad. He had come here to investigate whispers of discontent, but what he was hearing felt like a blatant, systemic betrayal of everything his father had built their name on. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of new car plastic and cheap coffee suddenly cloying. The smooth-talking salesman was destroying his company, one customer at a time. And Jason had just heard it, cold and undeniable. Jason Carter, at 46, was a man who understood the weight of legacy. Carter's Trucks hadn't always been a 12-dealership chain spanning the Midwest. It had started as a single dusty lot in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, founded by his father, Big Jim Carter, a man whose handshake was his bond and whose business philosophy was simple: sell a man a good truck at a fair price, and he'll come back. Treat him like family, and he'll bring his friends. Jason had grown up sweeping those dusty lots, learning the difference between a half-ton and a 1-ton before he could legally drive one, absorbing Big Jim's ethos like engine oil seeping into a rag. When Big Jim passed 10 years ago, Jason inherited not just a thriving business, but a reputation for integrity. He'd expanded Carter's Trucks cautiously at first, then more aggressively, leveraging the brand's solid standing. He was a shrewd businessman, yes, with a keen eye for market trends and a head for numbers, but he believed he'd maintained his father's core values. His corporate office in Chicago was sleek, a world away from the gritty reality of sales floors, but he prided himself on staying connected, or so he thought. His typical day involved meetings with regional managers, poring over financial reports, and strategizing expansion. He lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious suburban home with his wife, Emily, and their 2 teenage daughters, who were more interested in TikTok trends than torque ratios. Jason's escape was his restored 1978 Ford F-150, a relic of his youth, which he tinkered with on weekends. It kept him grounded, a tangible link to the mechanical honesty of the products his company sold. The Minneapolis dealership, located on a prime stretch of Cedar Avenue, was one of their newer acquisitions and initially one of the most promising. Sales figures were consistently high, often outperforming more established locations. Dan Reynolds, the general sales manager, had been a star hire, lauded for his aggressive tactics that, on paper, yielded impressive results. Jason had even given him a commendation at the last annual conference. But then the emails started trickling in. Not many at first, easy to dismiss as isolated incidents, the inevitable grumbles in a high-volume business. Feeling pressured, unexpected fees, lowballed on my trade-in. More concerning were the anonymous online reviews, angrier and more specific, painting a picture of a predatory sales environment at the Minneapolis branch. Then came an internal audit flag. While gross sales were up, net profit margins per unit were behaving erratically, sometimes inexplicably lower than expected on high-value sales, while service contract uptakes were through the roof, often with the highest tier, highest commission packages. Jason felt a knot of unease. It wasn't just about money. It was about the Carter name. He discussed it with his COO, Frank, a contemporary of his father's. Frank had suggested sending in a corporate review team, but Jason felt a more direct, unvarnished look was needed. The idea of going undercover had started as a half-joke, a nod to those reality TV shows, but the more he thought about it, the more it appealed to his hands-on upbringing. He needed to see it for himself, unfiltered. He chose the persona of Mike Thompson, a carpenter from out of state, looking for a reliable work truck. The disguise was simple: a worn flannel shirt over a faded band t-shirt, scuffed work boots, a John Deere cap pulled low to shadow his face, and a pair of cheap, non-prescription glasses to alter his familiar features slightly. He even practiced a slightly different gait, a working man's weary shuffle. He told Emily he was going on a multi-day fishing trip, a believable excuse for his absence. The only other person who knew the truth was his head of security, a former detective named Henderson, who would be discreetly on call if things went sideways. The stage was set for Jason to walk into his own dealership and see what kind of show Dan Reynolds was really running. Jason, as Mike Thompson, pushed open the heavy glass door of Carter's Trucks Minneapolis, the scent of industrial cleaner and new tires washing over him. The showroom was bright, Almost clinically so, rows of gleaming pickups angled precisely under the fluorescent lights. Country music played softly, a backdrop to the low murmur of conversations between salespeople and customers. He deliberately avoided making eye contact with the first few salespeople, aiming for the look of a man slightly intimidated by the process, someone who didn't want to be pounced on. He drifted towards a line of heavy-duty trucks, running a hand over the fender of a silver Ram 2500. After a few minutes, a young woman approached him. She wore the standard Carter's Trucks polo shirt, her name tag reading Sarah. She seemed barely out of college, with an eager, open face. "Hi there. Welcome to Carter's. Can I help you find anything specific today?" she asked, her smile genuine. Yeah, maybe," Jason mumbled, playing his role. "Name's Mike. Looking for something for work. Haul tools, maybe a small trailer. Diesel, probably. Don't need all the fancy stuff." Sarah nodded. "Okay, Mike. We've got some great options. Are you familiar with the new Cummins engines? They've got incredible torque." She led him towards a slightly less option model, a Ford F-250XL. She was good, not pushy, explaining features clearly. Jason asked about fuel economy, maintenance costs, and the warranty, careful to sound like a cautious, budget-conscious buyer. "And what about trade-ins?" Jason asked, gesturing vaguely. "Got an older Chevy, still runs okay, but she's seen better days." "We definitely do trade-ins," Sarah said brightly. "We can get that appraised for you. If you pick out a truck you like, we can work up some numbers. I'll just grab a buyer's order form so we can pencil things out. Maybe look at financing options." "Yeah, okay. Don't want no surprises on the price, though," Jason said, trying to sound wary. "Heard some stories about dealerships." Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so quick Jason almost missed it. "Oh, we're very transparent here, Mr. Thompson. Everything will be clearly itemized." She excused herself and headed towards a cluster of desks at the back of the showroom. It was in that moment, as Jason idly picked up a brochure, that the argument erupted behind him. The angry voice of Tom Larson, the customer, and the slick, dismissive tones of the salesman whom Jason would soon learn was Dan Reynolds, the star manager. Jason stood frozen, the sounds washing over him. Accusations of hidden fees, bait and switch, the sickening finality of Reynolds telling Larson he was stuck with the deal. "This is Luadao," Larson had shouted, the Vietnamese word for fraud from the online complaint Jason had read echoing strangely in his mind, though Larson had said in English. "This is a ripoff." Reynolds' smug retort. "You signed the contract, want it cheaper. You shouldn't have been so picky." Then the threat of a lawsuit, met with Reynolds' derisive laughter. "Go ahead. No one ever wins against us." A cold fury, unlike anything Jason had experienced in years, settled in his chest. This wasn't just a rogue salesperson. This was the manager. This was the man he'd praised. The casual cruelty, the blatant dishonesty, it was a desecration of everything Carter's Trucks was supposed to represent. His father's face flashed in his mind, stern and disappointed. The initial trickle of complaints, the odd numbers in the audit, they weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a rot that had set in, right here, under the stewardship of Dan Reynolds. Sarah returned then, holding a clipboard, her earlier brightness dimmed, likely having overheard the commotion. Jason's mission, initially a fact-finding tour, had just become intensely personal. His initial goal had been to observe, to understand. Now, it was to uncover the full extent of this betrayal and to excise it. He looked at Sarah, then in the direction of Reynolds' office. "Actually," Jason said, his voice carefully neutral, "before we get to that, I heard that other fella mention something about fees. Maybe I should talk to the manager, Mr. Reynolds, was it?" just to make sure I understand everything. Being a first-time buyer here, you know. Sarah hesitated. Mr. Reynolds is very busy, sir. I'm sure he is, Jason said, a hard edge creeping into his mic persona. But I got time, and I want to make sure I'm not going to be so picky that I get taken for a ride. He needed to get into Reynolds' office to see the man in action, to understand how deep this went. The investigation had truly begun. Sarah, looking uneasy, eventually agreed to fetch Dan Reynolds. A few minutes later, Reynolds emerged from a glass-walled office at the back. He was about 40, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place on a Saturday morning in a truck dealership. His dark hair was slicked back, and a perpetual salesman smile was fixed on his face, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Mr. Thompson? Dan Reynolds, General Sales Manager. He extended a hand, his grip firm, his eyes quickly scanning Jason's attire, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, perhaps sizing up a potential mark. Sarah tells me you're interested in one of our F-250s and had some questions about the process. Yeah, Mike Thompson. Just want to make sure I understand all the costs involved, Jason said, maintaining his guise as a slightly wary, unsophisticated buyer. Heard that other fella getting pretty hot under the collar. Reynolds chuckled, a smooth practice sound. Mr. Larson. A bit of a misunderstanding, that's all. Some customers get a little overwhelmed by the paperwork. But rest assured, Mike, we're all about transparency here at Carter's. Come on back to my office. We could go over everything. Inside Reynolds' office, which was noticeably larger and more opulently furnished than the other sales cubicles, the manager launched into his pitch. He was slick, persuasive, and relentlessly upbeat. When Jason, as Mike, pushed for a detailed breakdown of the price for the F-250 Sarah had shown him, Reynolds produced a preliminary sheet. Jason noted the base price, then a series of additional line items. Dealer documentation fee, $799, electronic titling fee, $299, appearance protection package, $1,299, and a vague customer care package, $999. Now, these are pretty standard, Reynolds said breezily, gesturing to the list. The protection package is great, covers paint, fabric, the works. And the customer care package includes nitrogen in your tires, window etching for security, real peace of mind. Nitrogen? My buddy just fills his tires with regular air, Jason probed. And what if I don't want that appearance package? I'm going to be hauling lumber, not going to car shows. Reynolds' smile tightened fractionally. Well, Mike, these packages are usually bundled for the best value. We find most of our customers appreciate the comprehensive coverage, and the window etching is a significant theft deterrent, often gets you an insurance discount. He definitely changed the subject. What about your trade-in? You mentioned an older Chevy. Jason described a hypothetical 2008 Silverado with moderate mileage. Reynolds tapped at his computer. Okay, based on a quick look for a truck like that, in average condition, we could probably offer you around, say, $3,500. Jason knew, even without specific Blue Book access, that a decently maintained Silverado of that vintage should fetch at least $6,000 to $7,000 on trade, perhaps more. This was a classic lowball. Seems a bit low, Jason ventured. I saw one similar listed online for closer to $8,000. Reynolds leaned back. Online listings are aspirational, Mike. We have to consider reconditioning costs. Market fluctuations, $3,500 is a strong offer, especially when you're getting into a brand new F-250 with our best protection. He pushed a credit application across the desk. Why don't we see what kind of financing you qualify for? We work with some great lenders, can often get people approved even with, shall we say, less than perfect credit. During this exchange, Jason had discreetly activated the voice recorder app on his phone, which lay screen down on his lap. He felt a grim satisfaction as Reynolds' smooth deceptions were captured. Over the next hour, Jason played the part of the hesitant buyer. Reynolds, sensing a potential deal slipping, ramped up the pressure, subtly at first, then more overtly. He spoke of limited-time incentives that were about to expire, of other customers interested in the same truck. He even hinted that Jason's non-existent average credit might only qualify for financing if he took the bundled packages, as they demonstrated a commitment to vehicle care that lenders like to see. Jason eventually made his excuses, saying he needed to talk it over with the missus. Reynolds' smile became a thin line. Don't wait too long, Mike. Trucks like this, at this price, they move fast. As Jason left the office, he saw Sarah conferring quietly with another young salesman, both looking stressed. He made a mental note, walking through the service department on his way out, claiming he wanted to see where he'd get his oil changes. He observed the operations. Everything there seemed normal, professional. The rot, it appeared, was concentrated on the sales floor, orchestrated from the manager's office. Later that afternoon, Jason, still as Mike, returned, saying he found a slightly better trade-in offer down the street, but was still interested in the F-250. This was a tactic to see how Reynolds would react to competition. Reynolds' demeanor shifted. He became more conspiratorial, suggesting that if Mike was willing to sign today, he could talk to his finance guy and maybe find some wiggle room or his special Carter's loyalty rebate. A rebate Jason knew didn't exist. The key, Reynolds emphasized, was signing today. Jason also witnessed Reynolds interact with another customer, an elderly woman looking for a small, economical SUV. He saw Reynolds guide her towards a higher trim model loaded with extras she clearly didn't need, speaking quickly, using jargon, and repeatedly assuring her it was the best deal for her security and peace of mind. The woman looked flustered and overwhelmed. The complication was becoming clear. This wasn't just one manager. Reynolds seemed to have a system. Were other salespeople complicit? Pressured? Jason had seen the stress on Sarah's face. Was she in on it, or a victim of it? The scope of the deception felt larger than just one man's greed. He needed more than just his own interactions. He needed to see how the system operated when he wasn't the target. For 3 more days, Jason Carter, under the guise of Mike Thompson, became a fixture at the Minneapolis dealership, albeit a discreet one. He'd arrive at different times, sometimes lingering in the customer lounge with a cup of stale coffee, other times wandering the used car lot out back, always observing, always listening. He made a show of still thinking about the F-250, telling Sarah he was getting his finances in order. This gave him a plausible reason to be around without raising too much suspicion. His audio recordings were growing, a disturbing collection of half-truths, pressure tactics, and outright lies, mostly from Reynolds, but also snippets from a couple of other senior salesmen who seemed to emulate their manager's style. He saw new recruits being trained by Reynolds, sessions where the emphasis was less on product knowledge and more on closing techniques and overcoming objections, with a particular focus on selling high-margin add-ons. He saw customers leave confused, some angry, but many resigned, clutching folders heavy with paperwork they likely hadn't fully read. The efficiency of the deception was chilling. The turning point, the moment the investigation shifted from concerning to alarming, came on a Tuesday evening. Jason had decided to park across the street from the dealership after closing, curious about who stayed late, what the after-hours atmosphere was like. He was in his rental car, a nondescript sedan, nursing a lukewarm soda, feeling more like a private investigator than a CEO. Around 7:30 p.m., well after the last customer had gone, he saw Dan Reynolds emerge from a side door with another man. Jason recognized him as Mark Jenkins, one of the dealership's most experienced salesmen, a guy who'd been with Carter's trucks even before the Minneapolis branch was acquired. They walked towards the employee parking area, which was dimly lit. Jason's car was parked far enough away to be inconspicuous, but close enough that, with a window cracked, he might catch some of their conversation if they spoke loudly. He strained his ears, his phone's recorder already active in his pocket. Reynolds lit a cigarette, the orange glow flaring in the darkness. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Another good day, Marky." That old couple with the trade-in squeezed an extra $2,000 out of them on the premium care package. They think nitrogen in their tires is space-age technology. Mark, a heavier-set man with a perpetually worried expression, shifted his weight. "Yeah, Dan, but I don't know." Mrs. Henderson looked like she was about to cry. And corporate's been sniffing around with those new audit protocols. Reynolds took a long drag from his cigarette, then exhaled a plume of smoke. Corporate? Carter sits in his ivory tower in Chicago. He sees the sales numbers, he's happy. He doesn't know how the sausage is made, and he doesn't want to. As long as this branch is hitting targets, he's not going to look too close. He paused, then his voice dropped, becoming more conspiratorial, yet still carrying in the quiet evening air. "And those fees? The creative ones? Let's just say they help supplement the official bottom line. A little for you, a little for me, a little for the guys who play ball. Keeps everyone motivated." Jason's blood ran cold. This was it. Not just aggressive sales, not just hidden fees, but a deliberate, organized system of skimming, of fraud, with Reynolds at the center apparently sharing the spoils. Mark still sounded uneasy. But what if someone blows the whistle? What if one of these customers actually follows through and sues, gets a lawyer who knows what they're looking at? Reynolds scoffed. Blows the whistle to who? Most of them just complain online. "We offer a free oil change." They go away. A lawsuit? Our legal team ties them in knots for years. And Carter's legal? They're there to protect the company, not some disgruntled buyer. Besides, Reynolds added, his voice taking on a chillingly pragmatic tone, "that's what we have the new guys for. Any real heat comes down, a few rookies take the fall. Plausible deniability. We're too valuable, Mark. We make this place sing." He clapped Mark on the shoulder. "Stop worrying. We got a good thing going here. Just keep hitting your numbers. Keep pushing those warranties and protection plans, and everyone eats." They got into their respective cars and drove off. Jason sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the recording still running. "A little for you, a little for me." Carter sits in his ivory tower. The sheer audacity, the contempt for him, for his father's legacy, for the customers they were supposed to serve, it was staggering. This wasn't just about inflated fees anymore. This was embezzlement, conspiracy, a deeply entrenched culture of corruption orchestrated by the very man he'd entrusted with one of his flagship stores. His initial goal of understanding and correcting some bad practices seemed laughably naive now. Reynolds wasn't just a bad manager. He was a cancer in the organization, and he was actively grooming others to be just like him. Jason Carter, the CEO, felt a surge of cold rage, but also a heavy weight of responsibility. He had let this happen. His ivory tower comment, though meant derisively by Reynolds, hit a nerve. Maybe he hadn't been close enough. He drove away from the dealership that night, a changed man. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time to gather the kind of evidence that would not just get Reynolds fired, but would see him face real consequences. He knew he couldn't go back to his old life, to his Chicago office, and pretend this wasn't happening. This was a point of no return. He had to burn this rot out of his company, no matter the cost. The drive back to his nondescript hotel room was a blur of anger and grim determination for Jason. Reynolds' words, "Carter sits in his ivory tower," He doesn't know how the sausage is made echoed in his mind, each syllable a fresh indictment of his own oversight. He had been too removed, too reliant on spreadsheets and regional summaries. The betrayal cut deep, not just as a CEO whose company was being defrauded, but as a son who felt he'd let his father's legacy be tarnished. Sleep was impossible. Jason spent the night pacing the small room, the damning audio recording of Reynolds and Mark playing on a loop in his head. The initial shock gave way to a cold, calculated resolve. This wasn't just about firing a corrupt manager anymore. This was about dismantling a criminal enterprise operating within his own company. He needed more than just his own undercover recordings. He needed irrefutable proof, the kind that would stand up in court and justify the drastic actions he knew he'd have to take. The first call he made at dawn was not to his COO, Frank, but to Arthur Henderson, his head of security. Henderson, a man with 2 decades of experience as a police detective before joining Carter's Trucks, listened impassively as Jason recounted what he'd seen and heard, including the damning parking lot conversation. "It's worse than we thought, Arthur," Jason concluded. "Reynolds isn't just bending rules. He's running a racket. Kickbacks skimming off the top with these bogus fees. I need a full forensic audit of the Minneapolis branch starting yesterday. And I need it quiet." "I know just the firm," Henderson replied, his voice calm and professional. "Independent, discreet, and they specialize in automotive dealership fraud. They can be on a plane by this afternoon, under the guise of a routine regional compliance check if you authorize it." "Authorize it," Jason said without hesitation. "Give them whatever resources they need. I want to know where every penny is going." His next call was to Elizabeth Marlowe, the lead attorney for Carter's Trucks. He brought her up to speed, careful to stick to the facts, the evidence he was gathering. Marlowe was sharp, pragmatic. "Jason, if what you suspect is true, and Reynolds is orchestrating this kind of systemic fraud, the implications are huge. We're talking potential civil liabilities from defrauded customers, reputational damage, and even criminal charges against him and anyone else involved. Your recordings are a good start, but the auditor's findings will be crucial." She advised him to continue gathering information if he could do so safely and without compromising his cover, but to be extremely careful. If Reynolds suspects you're onto him, he could start destroying evidence. Jason decided to stay in Minneapolis for a few more days, still as Mike Thompson. His focus shifted. He was no longer just observing general sales practices. He was looking for specifics that would corroborate the auditor's eventual findings. He subtly started asking other, lower-level employees, parts department staff, junior mechanics in the service bay, newer salespeople like Sarah about procedures. He'd frame his questions innocently. How does the paperwork for these add-on packages get processed? Or does Mr. Reynolds personally approve all the trade-in valuations? He noticed that Sarah, in particular, seemed increasingly stressed. During one brief interaction, when he asked her about a specific environmental protection fee he'd heard about, she looked genuinely distressed and mumbled something about standard charges before quickly excusing herself. He suspected she was caught in an impossible situation, perhaps aware of the wrongdoing, but too intimidated or inexperienced to speak out. He made a mental note to approach her carefully once this was all over. She might be a valuable witness, or at least someone who could confirm the pressure tactics. He also paid closer attention to the flow of vehicles, particularly trade-ins. He'd casually note the details of a car being traded, its make, model, apparent condition, and then later try to see how it was listed in the dealership's used inventory, or if it even appeared there. He suspected some high-value trade-ins might be undervalued on paper, with the difference pocketed or funneled elsewhere. The auditors arrived under the guise of a surprise regional performance audit. a tactic Henderson had used before to minimize suspicion. They were a team of three quiet, bespectacled individuals who blended into the background, requesting reams of financial data, sales contracts, and inventory records. Reynolds initially seemed unconcerned, even outwardly cooperative, though Jason, watching from afar, detected a new tension in the manager's demeanor. Jason, meanwhile, continued his Mike Thompson act, telling Reynolds he was still working on getting the down payment together for the F-250. This allowed him to be present without actively engaging in a transaction that might expose him. He used the time to document everything: license plates of vehicles involved in questionable deals, names of salespeople who seemed particularly close to Reynolds, even the specific language used to sell dubious add-ons. His phone was filled with discrete photos of internal documents left momentarily unattended, and more audio notes. The personal stakes felt immense. Every smarmy comment from Reynolds, every pressured sale he witnessed, fueled his resolve. He thought of his employees, the vast majority of whom were honest, hard-working people, and how their reputations were being sullied. He thought of his customers, who came to Carter's trucks expecting the fairness his father had championed. He was no longer just reacting, he was actively building a case. His new plan was forming: gather overwhelming evidence, confront Reynolds and his cohorts publicly to send a clear message, and then undertake a complete overhaul of the Minneapolis branch, making it a model of transparency. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about redemption for his company and for himself. The following week was a masterclass in controlled tension. The auditors, led by a stoic woman named Ms. Albright, worked with quiet intensity in a cordoned-off section of the conference room. Reynolds, despite his initial show of bravado, was visibly on edge. He made more frequent trips to the conference room, offering unsolicited assistance, his usually slick demeanor showing cracks. Jason, still Mike Thompson to the dealership, observed this subtle shift, his own resolve hardening with each passing day. He continued his charade, occasionally asking Sarah about the F-250, always with a new excuse for not yet being ready to buy. Ms. Albright delivered her preliminary findings to Jason in a clandestine meeting at his hotel. The evidence was damning. She had uncovered a sophisticated system of falsified invoices for non-existent vehicle prep services, systematically undervalued trade-ins where the difference was funneled into a separate account linked to Reynolds, and a clear pattern of pushing unnecessary, high-commission financial product from a specific third-party lender who, it turned out, was giving Reynolds substantial kickbacks. The auditors estimated the embezzlement to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 18 months. Mr. Reynolds is not just an aggressive salesman, Mr. Carter, Albright stated, her tone devoid of emotion. He's running a criminal enterprise within your dealership. We found evidence of collusion with at least 2 other senior salesmen, Mark Jenkins being one, and a finance manager who appears to be complicit in falsifying credit applications to push customers into higher interest loans. Armed with this, Jason had another secure call with Elizabeth Marlowe and Arthur Henderson. The path was clear. They had enough for termination and strong grounds for criminal prosecution. Marlowe began preparing severance documentation for those who would be fired and liaising with the Minneapolis Police Department's Economic Crimes Unit. Henderson started arranging for discreet security to be present on the day Jason planned to make his move. Jason felt the weight of the impending confrontation. This wasn't just a business decision, it was a moral reckoning. He spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling of his hotel room, a dark night of the soul, moment where doubts gnawed at him. What would this do to the Carter's Trucks brand? How would the honest employees react? Could the damage ever be truly repaired? He thought of his father, Big Jim, and the simple integrity he'd embodied. That thought, more than anything, steeled his nerves. He had to see this through, not just to punish the guilty, but to restore the soul of his company. His plan was to call an all-hands meeting at the Minneapolis dealership for Friday morning, under the pretense of a major corporate announcement. He would reveal himself then, confront Reynolds and his accomplices, and announce the immediate changes. On Thursday, Jason, as Mike, made one last visit to the showroom. He saw Tom Larson, the customer from his first day undercover, enter the dealership. Larson looked defeated, carrying a thick folder. He was presumably there to finalize the disputed purchase, having found no other recourse. Jason's heart ached for him, but he knew he couldn't intervene yet, not without tipping his hand. This injustice would be one of the first he'd rectify. He found Sarah at her desk, looking pale and tired. He approached her, his Mike persona softened with a hint of genuine concern. "You all right, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, just a long week." "Yeah, tell me about it," Jason said. "This whole truck buying thing is more stressful than I thought. Seems like there's a lot of ways to get tripped up if you ain't careful." He paused, then added, "A person could get into real trouble working in a place like this if they weren't straight as an arrow, I reckon." Sarah looked at him, a flicker of understanding, maybe even desperation, in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it, simply nodding. "You have to be careful everywhere, I guess." It was a small moment, but it confirmed to Jason that Sarah was not one of them. She was trapped, likely scared. He made a mental note to ensure she was supported after the storm broke. The final preparations were made. Henderson confirmed the police would be on standby, ready to act on Marlowe's formal complaint once the internal confrontation had occurred. Jason reviewed the auditor's summary one last time, his own recordings queued up on his phone. He laid out the suit he would wear the next day, more flannel shirts and John Deere caps. It was time for Jason Carter, CEO, to step out of the shadows. The tension was almost unbearable, but beneath it was a current of grim anticipation. Tomorrow, the music would stop. Friday morning arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring the mood Jason Carter carried into his Minneapolis dealership. This time, he didn't enter as Mike Thompson. He walked in through the main doors wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his expression resolute. The familiar scent of new cars and coffee hit him, but today it felt tainted. The usual showroom bustle seemed subdued, an undercurrent of anxiety palpable as employees gathered in the designated meeting area near the service department. He'd instructed the acting branch manager, flown in secretly the night before, to summon everyone's sales, service, parts, admin. Dan Reynolds stood near the front, attempting an air of managerial composure, though his eyes darted nervously towards Jason. He clearly recognized him as the CEO, but not yet as Mike Thompson. Mark Jenkins and the implicated finance manager were nearby, looking uneasy. Sarah stood with a group of younger salespeople, her face pale. Jason stepped onto a small, improvised platform as sturdy parts crate. He scanned the faces of his employees, his gaze lingering for a moment on Reynolds. "Good morning," Jason began, his voice calm, but carrying authority that instantly silenced the room. "For those of you who don't know me from my picture in the company newsletter, I am Jason Carter, CEO of Carter's Trucks." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Reynolds forced a smile. "Mr. Carter, this is an honor. We weren't expecting such a distinguished visitor. To what do we owe the pleasure?" Jason's eyes narrowed. "I've been here for over a week, Dan. I came to buy a truck. As a customer named Mike Thompson." The color drained from Reynolds' face. His forced smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Mark Jenkins visibly flinched. And in that week, Jason continued, his voice rising slightly, I've seen things that have made me sick. I've seen customers pressured, lied to, and systematically defrauded. I've seen the values my father built this company on dragged through the mud. He pulled out his phone. I heard a lot of things. For instance, I heard you, Dan, bragging about how you skim money, how you think I'm just sitting in an ivory tower, oblivious. He played a short, damning segment of the parking lot recording Reynolds' voice, arrogant and dismissive, filled the stunned silence of the showroom. Tiền phí đó, một nửa vào túi tao, một nửa chia cho các cậu. Im miệng, và mọi người đều có phần. That fee money? Half of my pocket, half for you guys. Shut up, and everyone gets a piece. The original Vietnamese quote, while not spoken by Reynolds in the recording, represented the spirit of the theft and resonated with Jason's memory of the initial complaints that sparked his investigation. He then played Reynolds' actual English words about the kickbacks. Reynolds was ashen. Carter, that's out of context. Is it? Jason countered, his voice like ice. Is it out of context that our independent auditors have found hundreds of thousands of dollars embezzled through falsified service fees and undervalued trade-ins, funneled into accounts you control? Is it out of context that you've been receiving kickbacks from finance companies for pushing our customers into predatory loans? He gestured towards the main entrance. Two uniformed Minneapolis police officers and Arthur Henderson stepped inside. Dan Reynolds, Mark Jenkins, and Mr. Alastair Finch from finance. You are all terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud. The police have a warrant for your arrest. Reynolds sputtered, looking wildly around as if seeking an escape. Jenkins stared at the floor. Finch seemed to shrink into himself. The officers moved forward calmly and efficiently. As Reynolds was being cuffed, he shot a venomous glare at Jason. You'll regret this, Carter. You have no idea what you're doing to this branch. On the contrary, Dan, Jason said steadily. I'm finally doing what should have been done a long time ago. I'm taking out the trash. The immediate aftermath of the arrest was chaotic, yet controlled. Jason addressed the remaining stunned employees, his voice firm but reassuring. Carter's Trucks was built on honesty and fair dealing. What happened here was a betrayal of those principles, a betrayal of your trust, and a betrayal of our customers. That ends today. He announced that all pending deals made under Reynolds would be reviewed, and any identified overcharges or fraudulent fees would be refunded. He specifically mentioned Tom Larson, instructing the temporary manager to contact him immediately to void the predatory contract and offer him a new deal at a fair price, along with a sincere apology from Jason himself. Sarah was appointed as the interim sales lead, a look of shock and then quiet determination on her face. Jason publicly commended her for maintaining her integrity under difficult circumstances, a fact he'd subtly confirmed through his observations and her reactions. He announced a nationwide search for a new permanent general manager, one whose ethics were beyond reproach. New policies were rolled out immediately. Transparent, itemized pricing on all deals, a mandatory two-signature approval for all add-ons and financing agreements, trade and valuations based on independent, verifiable market data, and an anonymous whistleblower hotline directly to Jason's office. The story inevitably broke in the local news. Isabel Carter, no relation, a journalist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, picked up on it, and after an interview with a candid Jason, ran a piece titled, Undercover Owner Busts Fraud Ring at Own Dealership. Carter's Trucks pledges new era of transparency. Instead of damaging the brand, as Reynolds predicted, the decisive action and Jason's transparent handling of the scandal began to rebuild trust. Customers, hearing of the reforms and Jason's personal commitment, started returning. Some were curious. Others were supportive of a business willing to clean its own house so publicly. Within 6 months, under new management and with a revitalized, ethical sales team led by a now confident Sarah, who was eventually confirmed as the permanent sales manager, the Minneapolis branch saw its legitimate sales figures climb by 25%. Customer satisfaction scores soared. The atmosphere in the showroom was different, less frenetic, more professional and customer-focused. Jason Carter stood with Sarah at the unveiling of a newly renovated customer lounge, complete with a clear pricing policy board and a coffee bar. "You gave us a reason to be proud to work here again, Mr. Carter," Sarah said, shaking his hand. Jason looked out at the showroom, at customers chatting comfortably with salespeople, at the open, honest environment. "This isn't just about selling trucks, Sarah," he replied, a genuine smile on his face. "It's about doing the right thing. We lost our way here for a while, but we're back on the right road." He had faced a rot in his own company and, by confronting it head-on, had not only saved the dealership, but had reaffirmed the bedrock principles upon which Carter's Trucks was founded. The view from his ivory tower was much clearer now.